The rifle shot cracked through the morning air like thunder, sending sparrows exploding from the oak trees. Caspian Wetstorm jerked his horse to a halt, dust swirling around the animal's hooves as he squinted toward the ramshackle cabin where the sound had originated. Through the haze, he saw her, a woman with wild auburn hair, stumbling from the doorway, a bundle clutched against her chest, blood on her torn calico dress. "Please," she called out, her voice raw with desperation. "He's coming back." Behind her, a girl no older than 16 emerged, cradling an infant whose cries pierced the morning silence. The girl's dark eyes locked onto Caspian's face with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Can you buy us, mister?" she asked, her words so unexpected they hit him like a physical blow. "We ain't worth much, but we're willing workers." Caspian's weathered hands tightened on the reins. In all his 34 years of drifting from town to town, he'd never heard such words spoken with such haunting sincerity. The woman, barely more than 25 by his estimation, stepped forward, her green eyes blazing with fierce protectiveness. "My name's Cordelia Ravencrest," she said, chin raised despite the tremor in her voice. "This here's my sister Magnolia, and the baby's mine. We got nowhere left to go, and Jeremiah Thornfield's fixing to drag us back to his place whether we like it or not." The sound of approaching hoofbeats rumbled like distant thunder. Caspian counted at least 6 riders, maybe more, crashing through the underbrush with the subtlety of a stampede. His jaw clenched as he recognized the type land barons who thought they owned everything and everyone within 50 miles. "How much you asking?" he heard himself say, the words tumbling out before his logical mind could stop them. Cordelia's eyes widened. Magnolia stepped closer, the baby's cries softening as if sensing the shift in the wind. "Whatever you think." "We're worth," Cordelia whispered. "We can cook, clean, tend livestock. Magnolia's got a way with healing herbs, and I can shoot straight as any man." The riders burst into view 6 men in black hats, led by a bull of a man with silver whiskers and eyes like chips of flint. Jeremiah Thornfield reined in his horse so hard the animal reared, foam flying from its mouth. "Wetstorm!" Thornfield's voice boomed across the clearing. "You got no business here. These women belong to me fair and square. Their daddy owed me money, and now they're working it off." Caspian's hand drifted toward the Colt .45 at his hip, a gesture so subtle only trained eyes would catch it. "Funny thing about debts, Thornfield. They die with the debtor." His voice carried the kind of quiet menace that made smart men step back. "Unless you got papers saying otherwise." Thornfield's face reddened like a boiled beet. "I don't need papers. In my own territory, boy. Now step aside, or what?" Caspian's question hung in the air like smoke. Cordelia moved to his horse's side, her hand resting on his boot. The simple touch sent electricity shooting up his leg. "I choose him," she said, her voice ringing clear. "Whatever price he pays, I accept." The baby stopped crying entirely, as if the very air held its breath. Thornfield's laughter boomed across the clearing like cannon fire. "You think some drifting saddle tramp can outbid me, woman? I'll give you $50 gold for all 3 generous, considering the circumstances." Caspian felt Cordelia's fingers tighten on his boot leather. Without breaking eye contact with Thornfield, he reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a leather pouch that clinked with the weight of coins. $100, he said, his voice steady as bedrock. "Gold." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Even Thornfield's men shifted uncomfortably in their saddles, recognizing the kind of money that could change everything. Magnolia's eyes widened to saucer size, the baby gurgling contentedly in her arms as if sensing the tide turning. "Where'd a saddle bum like you come by that kind of money?" Thornfield snarled, though uncertainty crept into his voice like frost on morning grass. Won it fair and square in a poker game up in Colorado, Caspian replied, which wasn't entirely a lie. He'd also inherited a fair sum from his grandfather's silver mine, but that was nobody's business but his own. Question is, do we have a deal, or do I need to find someone else to conduct business with? Cordelia looked up at him with something. Approaching wonder. You'd really pay that much for strangers? Maybe I see something worth paying for, he said, his eyes never leaving her face. The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning, and color rose in her cheeks like dawn breaking over the mountains. Thornfield spat into the dust. This ain't over, Wet Storm. Mark my words. But he was already backing down, his men following. Suit, $100 gold was more than most folks saw in 5 years. And even his greed had limits when faced with such wealth. As the riders disappeared into the morning haze, Caspian dismounted and approached the women. Up close he could see the exhaustion etched in every line of Cordelia's face, the way Magnolia swayed on her feet despite her brave front. You need food, he observed, and rest. And probably a doctor for that baby. We're stronger than we look, Cordelia said, but her voice wavered with fatigue. I don't doubt it. But strength don't mean you got to carry the whole world on your shoulders. He studied her face, noting the intelligence behind her green eyes, the determination in the set of her jaw. What really happened back there? And don't tell me it was just about your daddy's debts. Cordelia glanced at Magnolia, some silent communication passing between the sisters. Finally, she spoke. Thornfield killed our father in cold blood, then claimed he owed money to cover his tracks. Said we could work off the debt at his place, but ... She shuddered. His idea of work wasn't cooking and cleaning, if you catch my meaning. Caspian's blood turned to ice water. How long ago? 3 days. We've been hiding in that old cabin since, but he found us this morning. Would have taken us if you hadn't? Come along. Her eyes searched his face. Why did you help us? Really? The question hung between them like morning mist. Caspian found himself studying the way sunlight caught the auburn highlights in her hair, the fierce protectiveness in her stance as she positioned herself between him and her sister. Maybe because I know what it's like to have nowhere left to run, he said finally. And maybe because I've been riding alone so long, I forgot what it felt like to have something worth protecting. The baby chose that moment to let out a healthy wail, breaking the spell that seemed to have fallen over them. Magnolia rocked gently, humming a low melody that gradually soothed the infant back to quiet. Where will we go? Cordelia asked Caspian. Looked toward the horizon, where purple mountains rose like sleeping giants against the morning sky. I got a place, he said. Small ranch about 2 days' ride from here. Nothing fancy, but it's got good water and pasture land. Room for folks to start over if they're willing to work for it. And the arrangement between us? He met her eyes directly. Whatever you want it to be. That money I paid? Consider it an investment in good neighbors. Nothing more, unless... He left the sentence hanging. Unless what? Unless somewhere down the road, we both decide we want it to be something more. The ranch house sat in a valley cupped between rolling hills like a pearl in an oyster shell. Cordelia had expected something rough and temporary, the kind of place drifters called home, for a season before moving on. Instead, she found solid log construction with a stone chimney, corrals built to last, and a well that ran clear and cold even in the heat of midday. Built it myself over the past 3 years, Caspian said, swinging down from his horse with practiced ease. Had help from some Cheyenne friends for the heavy lifting. Magnolia shifted the baby to one arm and touched the smooth chinked logs with wonder. It's beautiful, she breathed, like something out of a fairy tale. Fairy tales. Got happy endings, Cordelia said, though she couldn't keep the hope from creeping into her voice. Real life's usually messier. Caspian studied her with those gray eyes that seemed to see too much. Maybe that depends on who's writing the story. The inside of the house surprised her even more. Clean swept floors, handmade furniture that showed. Real craftsmanship and windows positioned to catch both morning light and evening breezes. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with iron hooks for cooking and a mantel that held a few books and a daguerreotype of an older man who shared. Caspian's strong jaw. Your father? She asked, nodding toward the photograph. Grandfather. Raised me after my parents died of fever when I was 12. His voice carried old pain, carefully contained. He's the one taught me about building things to last. That evening, as Magnolia fed the baby and Cordelia prepared their first real meal in days, she found herself watching Caspian move around his own space. He was gentle with everything he touched, the way he banked the fire, the careful way he set down his coffee cup, the patient way he showed Magnolia how to adjust the lamp wick for the best light. What's the baby's name? He asked as they sat around the rough-hewn table. Haven't given him one yet, Magnolia said, color rising in her cheeks. Seemed like naming him would make it all too real, you know? Like admitting I'm really somebody's mother now. The father? Caspian asked quietly. Magnolia's eyes filled with tears. He was a good man, promised to marry me come spring, but she looked down at the baby's perfect tiny face. Thornfield shot him too, just for standing up to him about something else entirely. Never even knew about the baby. Caspian reached across the table and covered her hand with his own weathered one. I'm sorry for your loss. Both your losses. The simple kindness in his words seemed to break something loose in Magnolia. She cried then, great gulping sobs that she'd been holding back for days. Cordelia moved to comfort her, but Caspian was already there, offering his clean bandana and a gentle presence that asked for nothing in return. Later, after Magnolia had fallen asleep with the baby on a makeshift bed near the fire, Cordelia found herself alone with Caspian on the front porch. Stars wheeled overhead like scattered diamonds, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to its pack. You didn't have to be so kind to her, she said. Most men would have ... Would have. What? Judged her for circumstances beyond her control? Blamed her for other folks' cruelty? He shook his head. Maybe I've seen enough of the world's ugliness to appreciate its beauty when I find it. She studied his profile in the starlight. What made you so wise? Mistakes. Lots of them. He turned to look at her, and she felt that familiar electricity crackle between them. What about you? What made you so strong? Necessity? Someone had to take care of Magnolia after Ma died. Someone had to keep us fed and clothed and safe. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Did a bang-up job of the safe part, didn't I? You did what you could with what you had. That's all anyone can do. The simple acceptance in his voice nearly undid her. When had anyone ever told her that her efforts were enough? That she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders? Caspian, she said, testing his name on her tongue. That's not a common name around these parts. My grandfather chose it. Said it meant master of the treasure. He smiled, and for a moment he looked younger, less weathered by the world's hard edges. Always figured he was being optimistic. Maybe he saw something you haven't discovered yet. Their eyes met and held. The air between them seemed charged with possibility, with the recognition that something was building between them, something that had nothing to do with transactions or debts or desperate bargains. Cordelia, he said softly, that money I paid today, forget about it. This isn't about buying or owning anything. This is about ... He searched for the right words. This is about finding something worth staying still for. She felt tears prick. Her eyes, I don't even know if I remember how to stay still. Then maybe we can learn together. 3 weeks passed like pages turning in a well-loved book. Cordelia found herself settling into rhythms. She'd never expected morning coffee with Caspian as they planned the day's work. Afternoons spent tending the vegetable garden she'd planted behind the house. Evenings when they'd sit on the porch and talk about everything and nothing while Magnolia sang lullabies to little Phoenix, the name she'd finally chosen for her. Sun. The name had come to her one morning as she watched the baby sleep in a shaft of golden sunlight. Phoenix, rising from ashes. It seemed fitting. Caspian proved to be a man of unexpected depths. He could shoe a horse, build furniture that would last generations, and read Latin well enough to translate the old books his grandfather had left him. But it was the smaller things that caught Cordelia's attention, the way he always let her. Serve herself first at meals, how he'd quietly completed her heavy chores before she woke, the patience he showed when teaching Magnolia to milk the cow. "You're different than other men I've known," she told him one evening as they sat watching fireflies dance among the cottonwoods. "Different how?" "Quieter. Like you think before you speak." She picked at the fabric of her skirt, a new one he'd bought for her on a trip to town, along with supplies and fabric for baby clothes. "Most men I've met, they fill up all the empty spaces with noise. You seem comfortable with silence." "Spent a lot of years alone," he said simply. "Teaches you the difference between talking and saying something worth hearing." She turned to study his profile. "Do you ever get lonely?" "Did. Don't so much anymore." The simple words sent warmth spreading through her chest. Over the weeks, she'd found herself looking forward to these evening conversations, to the way his voice gentled when he spoke of his dreams for the ranch, to the careful way he asked about her own hopes and fears. "What did you want to be?" he asked. "Before everything got complicated, I mean. When you were young enough to believe the world was full of possibilities." She considered the question seriously. "A teacher, maybe. I always liked helping other folks learn things. Used to teach Magnolia her letters and numbers after our parents gave up trying." She smiled at the memory. "What about you?" "This, mostly. Always wanted a place of my own, room to raise horses and maybe a family someday." He glanced at her sideways. "Though I'll admit, I pictured doing it alone. And now?" "Now I think maybe I was lacking imagination." The next morning brought visitors, not the hostile kind they'd feared, but a circuit preacher named Reverend Holloway, and his wife, traveling through on their monthly rounds. They were a pleasant couple, weathered by years of frontier service but possessed of genuine warmth. "Haven't seen you at services, Mr. Wetstorm," the Reverend said over coffee and Cordelia's fresh-baked biscuits. "Though I understand you've had some changes in your household arrangements." Caspian glanced at Cordelia, something unspoken passing between them. "Changes, yes. Good ones, I think." Mrs. Holloway smiled at Magnolia, who was bouncing Phoenix on her knee. "Beautiful child. And Miss Ravencrest here has turned this place into a real home. You can see it in every corner." "Cordelia has a gift for making things better wherever she goes," Caspian said, and the quiet pride in his voice made her cheeks burn. After the visitors left, promising to return in a month's time, an odd tension settled over the house. Magnolia retired early with the baby, leaving Caspian and Cordelia alone with their thoughts and the weight of unspoken words. "They assumed we were married," she said finally. "They did. Didn't seem to bother you much." He set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "Would it bother you if people assumed?" She felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "I don't know. Would it bother you if they were right instead of just assuming?" The question hung between them like morning mist. Caspian stood and moved to the window, staring out at the star-scattered sky. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. "Cordelia, I need you to know something. What I feel for you ... It's got nothing to do with that transaction back at the cabin. It's got nothing to do with gratitude or obligation or any of that." She rose and moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. What does it have to do with? He turned to face her, his gray eyes serious as storm clouds. It has to do with the way you hum while you work. The way you worry about Magnolia even when you're bone tired. The way you make this house feel like home instead of just shelter. He reached up to touch her cheek with fingers that trembled. Slightly. It has to do with the fact that I can't imagine going back to the way things were before. She leaned into his touch, her eyes falling closed. Caspian. I love you, he said, the words simple and devastating. I know it's too soon, and I know our circumstances are complicated, but I needed you to know. She opened her eyes to find him watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. It's terrifying, she whispered. What is? How much I love you back. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, tentative as the first drops of rain after a long drought. Then Cordelia's arms wound around his neck and she pressed closer, and Caspian's careful restraint cracked like ice in spring, his hands tangled in her auburn hair as he deepened the kiss, pouring weeks of unspoken longing into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Cordelia rested her forehead against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart under her palm. What happens now? She whispered. Now we figure out how to build a life together, he said, his voice rough with emotion. If that's what you want. She pulled back to look at him, seeing her own wonder reflected in his eyes. I want that more than anything. But Magnolia and Phoenix are part of you, which makes them part of this. Part of us. He cupped her face. In both hands. I'm not asking you to choose between them and me, Cordelia. I'm asking you to choose all of us, together. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet planning and stolen moments. Caspian rode to town and returned with a ring simple. Gold, but it fit her finger like it had been made for her. They agreed to marry when Reverend Holloway returned the following month, with just Magnolia and Phoenix as witnesses, but life on the frontier rarely followed neat plans. 4 days before the Reverend's scheduled return, Magnolia woke burning. With fever, Phoenix, too, was listless and refusing to nurse. Cordelia spent sleepless hours bathing them with cool cloths while Caspian rode hard to fetch the nearest doctor, a gruff but competent man named Dr. Samuel Westbridge who lived 20 miles away. Influenza, the doctor pronounced after examining both patients. Bad strain of it, too. The baby's especially vulnerable. Cordelia felt the world tilt sideways. Will they? Can't say for certain. Next few days will tell the tale. Keep them cool. Keep trying to get fluids into them and pray. Dr. Westbridge packed up his black bag with practiced efficiency. I'll check back in 2 days if I can. That night, as Magnolia tossed in fevered delirium and Phoenix's breathing grew labored, Cordelia found herself questioning everything. Maybe loving someone meant nothing but heartbreak. Maybe hope was just another word for foolishness. Hey, Caspian said softly, finding her slumped in the chair beside Magnolia's bed. When's the last time you slept? Can't sleep? What if? What? If you collapse from exhaustion and can't help anybody? He pulled another chair close to hers and sat down. I'll watch them. You rest. I can't. If something happens, I'll wake you. But running yourself into the ground won't help them get better. She wanted to argue, but fatigue was making her thoughts fuzzy and her hands shake. Reluctantly, she allowed him to guide her to their bed, she thought with a pang. Though they'd shared nothing more than chaste kisses and the occasional stolen embrace, she woke hours later to find him still in the chair, Phoenix cradled against his chest while the baby breathed in shallow, labored pants. Magnolia's fever seemed to have broken, but the baby was worse. How long have you been holding him? She whispered. Couple hours. Seemed to breathe easier when I picked him up. He looked exhausted but determined. Magnolia's been asking for you. She knelt beside her sister's bed, relieved to see clear eyes instead of the glassy stare of fever. "How do you feel?" "Like I got trampled by a herd of cattle," Magnolia rasped. "But better? Phoenix?" Cordelia glanced at Caspian, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. The baby was fighting, but it was unclear whether he was winning. "He's struggling," she said honestly. "But he's got your stubbornness. That has to count for something." Magnolia tried to smile. Always was a fighter, even in the womb. Kicked like a mule. Her expression grew serious. "Cordelia, if something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you." "If it does," Magnolia continued with quiet determination, "promise me you'll take care of him. Raise him like he's your own. Don't let him grow up thinking he wasn't wanted." Cordelia felt tears burning her eyes. "You're going to raise him yourself. You're going to get better, and we're all going to. Promise me." The word hung in the air like a physical thing. Cordelia looked at Caspian, seeing her own emotions reflected in his face. "I promise," she whispered that the crisis broke near dawn. Phoenix's breathing suddenly eased, his color improved, and he began nursing with something approaching his old vigor. By midday, both patients were clearly on the mend. "Thought we might lose them both," Caspian said as they sat on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. "Would have broken your heart." "Would have broken all our hearts," she corrected. "You love them too, I can see it." He was quiet for a long moment. "Never thought I'd be a family man. Always figured I was too set in my ways, too used to solitude." He reached for her hand. "Funny how life changes your mind about things. Are you having second thoughts?" "About us, I mean." "About taking on a ready-made family?" He turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. "Only second thought I'm having is wondering why it took me so long to find you." Reverend Holloway arrived on a Thursday morning when the cottonwoods were beginning to turn gold and the air carried the first hint of autumn's chill. He found Caspian mending fence posts while Cordelia hung laundry on the line, Magnolia playing with Phoenix in a patch of warm sunlight nearby. The scene was so perfectly domestic that the Reverend smiled despite himself. "Looks like you folks have settled into a good rhythm," he observed, accepting the coffee Cordelia offered with grateful hands. "Best rhythm I've ever known," Caspian replied, his eyes finding Cordelia's across the yard. "Which brings us to something we wanted to discuss with you." The wedding ceremony was simple but heartfelt, conducted in the front room with Magnolia as witness and Phoenix gurgling contentedly in her arms. Cordelia wore the blue dress Caspian had bought her in town, with wildflowers in her hair that Magnolia had gathered that morning. Caspian had cleaned up remarkably well, his dark hair combed back and his best shirt pressed smooth. "Do you, Caspian Wetstorm, take Cordelia Ravencrest to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Holloway's voice carried the weight of years performing this sacred ritual. "I do," Caspian said, his voice steady as bedrock. "Before God and these witnesses, I promise to love, honor, and cherish her all the days of my life." When it came time for Cordelia's vows, she found herself looking deep into Caspian's gray eyes and speaking from the heart instead of following the traditional words. "I promise to stand by you in good times and bad," she said. "To be your partner in building the life we both want. To love you not just for who you are today, but for who you're still becoming." The kiss that sealed their marriage was sweet and full of promise. As they broke apart, Phoenix chose that moment to let out a delighted squeal as if he approved of the proceedings. "Well," Reverend Holloway said with a chuckle, "I'd say that's as fine a blessing as any." That evening, after the Reverend had departed and Magnolia had retired early with Phoenix, Caspian and Cordelia found themselves alone as husband and wife for the first time. The weight of it, the reality of their new status, seemed to fill the room like smoke. "Are you nervous?" Caspian asked, his voice gentler than usual. Cordelia considered the question seriously. Not nervous exactly. More like expectant, like standing on the edge of something beautiful and unknown. He moved closer, reaching up to touch the wildflowers still woven through her hair. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he said simply, inside and out. Their wedding night was everything she'd hoped and more tender and passionate and full of whispered promises in the darkness. Afterward, as she lay in the circle of his arms, Cordelia felt a peace she'd never known before. "No regrets?" he asked, his lips moving against her hair. "Only one," she said, and felt him tense slightly. "I regret it took us so long to find each other." The weeks that followed were the happiest of Cordelia's life. She threw herself into making improvements to their home curtains for the windows. A proper herb garden, a rocking chair where Magnolia could sit with Phoenix in the evenings. Caspian worked on expanding the corrals and breaking new horses, his plans for the ranch growing more ambitious now that he had a family to provide for. Magnolia bloomed in the safety and stability of their new life. Her natural gift with healing herbs proved invaluable, and she began developing a reputation among neighboring homesteaders as someone who could cure everything from colic to fever. Phoenix grew fat and happy, his laughter echoing through the Tinanduthi house like music, but their peace was shattered on a cold November morning when 6 riders appeared on the horizon. Even at a distance, Cordelia recognized the lead figure's bulk and bearing. "Thornfield," she breathed, her blood turning to ice water. Caspian was already reaching for his rifle. "Get Magnolia and the baby into the root cellar," he said, his voice deadly calm, "and stay there until I come for you. I'm not leaving you to face them alone. You're not leaving me. You're protecting our family. There's a difference." He pulled her close for a brief, fierce kiss. "I love you, Cordelia. Remember that, whatever happens." The riders thundered into the yard, their horses lathered with sweat and foam. Thornfield's face was twisted with rage and something else, desperation, maybe, or the kind of madness that comes from losing face in front of other men. "Wetstorm," he bellowed. "You think you can steal what's mine and get away with it? You? Think your money gives you the right to interfere in my business?" Caspian stepped onto the porch, the rifle held casually but ready. "I think a man has the right to protect his family from scum like you." "Your family?" Thornfield spat. "Those women belong to me. Their father died owing me money, and I mean to collect one way or another. Their father's dead. Debts die with the debtor, that's law, and you know it." Caspian's voice carried the kind of quiet menace that made smart men back down. "You killed him in cold blood, and now you're trying to cover your tracks by claiming ownership of his daughters. Prove it," Thornfield snarled. "Your word against mine, and I got 5 witnesses here say different." From the root cellar, Cordelia could hear every word. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she held Phoenix close, one hand covering his mouth to muffle any sounds he might make. Magnolia crouched beside her, pale as milk but steady. "Actually," a new voice cut through the tension, "you might want to reconsider that position, Thornfield." Sheriff Marcus Brightwater rode into the yard with 2 deputies flanking him, there, badges gleaming in the morning sun. Behind them came Dr. Westbridge and 3 other men Cordelia didn't recognize, all wearing the grim expressions of men who'd come to settle a long overdue account. Thornfield's face went white as bleached bone. "Sheriff, didn't expect to see you out this way." "I'll bet you didn't." Brightwater dismounted with deliberate slowness, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "See, I got some interesting information yesterday. Seems Dr. Westbridge here has been asking questions about a certain shooting that happened a few weeks back." Dr. Westbridge stepped forward, his black bag in one hand and a folded paper in the other. "I treated a man named Jeremiah Ravencrest for a bullet wound 2 days before he died. Got shot, but not immediately fatal. He lived long enough to tell me who shot him and why. Lying old fool, Thornfield blustered, but sweat was beading on his forehead. Ravencrest was drunk, probably shot himself cleaning his gun. Funny thing about dying men, Dr. Westbridge continued implacably. They tend to tell the truth. Ravencrest said you shot him over a poker game. Said he caught you cheating and called you on it, so you put a bullet in his belly and left him to die slow. One of the men behind the doctor stepped forward, a tall, rangy fellow with intelligent eyes. Name's Cornelius Hartwick. I was there that night, saw the whole thing. Been trying to work up the courage to come forward ever since. Another man nodded. Phineas Grayson. I saw it too. We all did. Thornfield shot Ravencrest in cold blood, then threatened to do the same to anyone who talked. The net was closing around Thornfield, and he knew it. His eyes darted from face to face, looking for escape routes that didn't exist. His men were already backing their horses away, unwilling to die for someone else's crimes. This is all lies, Thornfield roared. Conspiracy. They're in cahoots with that saddle tramp. Sheriff Brightwater sighed like a man who'd heard every excuse in the book. Jeremiah Thornfield, you're under arrest for the murder of Josiah Ravencrest. You have the right to... Thornfield's hand flew to his gun, but he was too slow and too desperate. Caspian's rifle cracked once, the sound echoing off the mountainsides like thunder. Thornfield toppled from his horse, clutching his shoulder and howling like a wounded animal. Should have killed you, he snarled through gritted teeth. Should have put a bullet between your eyes the first time I saw you. Maybe, Caspian said, lowering the rifle. But I'm not a murderer, unlike some people. As the sheriff and his deputies took Thornfield into custody, Caspian helped Cordelia and the others emerge from the root cellar. She flew into his arms, tears streaming down her face as she covered his face with kisses. I thought they might kill you, she sobbed. I thought I might lose you before we'd barely begun. Not going anywhere, he murmured against her hair. Not? Now, not ever. Sheriff Brightwater tipped his hat to them. Sorry it took so long to get justice for your father, ladies. Sometimes the law moves slower than we'd like, but it gets there eventually. What happens now? Magnolia asked, bouncing. Phoenix gently to keep him calm.